Hi. Um, Hi, everyone. I'm Porscha Burke of Random House, and I'm so honored to be here as part of the Afropunk Festival with our Rock and Read section of all of the festivities. Nic Stone is here with us. Hi, Nic.
Hey girl, hey.
Um, Nic is a multiple New York Times bestselling author. Her newest book, Dear Justice, is on sale now. Congratulations on all of your successes.
Thank you, Boo. It has been a wild ride, my friend.
Um, okay, well, can we talk a little bit about that wild ride? This is Dear Justice is not your first book. And clearly we're in a much different world than when you pub Dear Martin. Can you tell us a little bit about how you've experienced the difference in those two publications as they're kind of stories that talk to each other?
Yeah, I mean the main difference is like Dear Martin, I was all over the place, literally, and Dear Justice, I've been in my house for 8 months. Which it publishing. So I had two books come out during the pandemic. The first was in May, so it's like just when everything was starting to really and truly shut down. And then Dear Justice just came out at the end of September. And those two experiences were wildly different because, like, by the end of September, we've kind of gotten adjusted to being at home and having everything be virtual. And, like, it was very different. Siri talking to me, and I don't know why. Okay. That was weird. So, yeah. So, no, like, with Dear Martin, I was definitely I had like a little bit more trepidation about things. I was a lot more nervous about the things that I was writing about, especially as this little baby author who was coming in with this book about racism. Like, I don't know very many people who decide that they're going to start a publishing career with a book for teenagers about racism. So I was terrified when Dear Martin was about to publish. But with Dear Justice, it's just been like, oh, can it come out already? And that's partially because it's definitely the hardest book I've ever written. And I just wanted to be rid of it. Like, I just wanted it to be like at that place where I can't do anything else to it. Yeah.
Why was it the hardest book you've ever written?
Largely because of the subject matter. So with Dear Martin, so Dear Martin follows a 17-year-old Black kid who has this traumatic experience. This is Dear Martin. It follows this kid who has a traumatic experience with racial profiling and decides to start this journal of letters to the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., really to see if Dr. King's teachings will hold up now, right? Like in the 21st century. Dear Justice, though, is about a very different type of kid because where in Dear Martin, you have this kid who does have a bright future. He's like headed into this blindingly bright future, but is having to question all of these things because he knows that despite earning his way into this future, there are still people who are side-eyeing him and assuming that he's not qualified to be where he's going. In Dear Justice, you have a kid who has not had the kind of support that you see in Dear Martin, who does not have this super bright future ahead of him. And I've met far more Quan. So Quan is the main character in Dear Justice. I've met far more of these kids than I've met of the good kid doing everything right and dealing with wrong. And I think, there's a note at the end of Dear Justice, and I talk about how the most difficult thing about the book is knowing that the parts that were the most fictional are the parts where the kid gets the most support. There are so many young people who are locked up and their families have forsaken them. People just act like they're not there. And it's rough. I got a text message just yesterday. So one of the detention centers I visited while I was researching for Dear Justice is in the Bay Area. And she texted me twice last week to let me know on two different occasions, two of the boys that I met while I was there lost their lives to gun violence last week. And, it's things like that where like these kids get out, like you get out of the detention center and you wind up back where you were, and then, you know, and so it's knowing that the stories in this book, the things that I address and refer to in this book are all too real, made it a difficult thing to write.
Yeah, but you did it masterfully and
Thank you.
playfully and enjoyably. And yes, there's a lot of heartache and there's a lot of disappointment, but there's also a lot of stuff there's a lot of hope there and a lot of stuff that word nerds are going to love. And I saw that and very much enjoyed it. Can I ask, what made you want to publish in the first place? Like I say to writers that I work with, like when we write for ourselves. That's how we make sense of the world. That's how we express ourselves, communicate. But when you decide to publish, that's actually for other people, right? That's an act of service. You were saying that there is something within you that you think is going to resonate and is something that someone else needs. What took you from just writing for yourself to, okay, no, this is something that I need to share?
Interestingly enough, it was the opposite for me. So like I was writing so deciding to get into publishing had to do with writing for other people, and writing so that young people would have a different experience than the one that I had, because in middle and high school, I never saw myself in books. Like the books that we were told we had to read, if there were Black people in them, they were like slaves, or they were stupid, or they were scapegoats, or they were being like shoved out of their neighborhood. Like there was always something terrible happening to the Black people in the books that I was told I had to read as a kid. And that does something to a person who is in the process of identity development, right? So like you're trying to figure out who you are and where you fit in this world. That's what adolescence is. It's that space between being completely dependent on your parents and your parents being kind of the main source of your identity, to learning who you are as an individual and figuring out how you're going to position yourself in the world in relation to other people. So books are a space that, you know, you have this opportunity to step into another's shoes and to learn things that you then don't have to experience on your own. So when you're Black and like you don't see you doing anything in these books, like what it kind of, for me, it really, on the one hand, it made me wonder if I existed. Like, do I actually exist in this world out here? Because I see my classmates, I see them reflected in books and on TV and in all of this big deal stuff, but I don't see me. Like, what does that say about me? What does that mean for me? And I wrote my first book shortly after having my first kid. And like, I don't want my boys to have that experience where they don't see themselves in anything, where the books that they're reading don't have people like them in them. And I want like girls who are 15 or 16 or 17 and have questions about themselves to have something that they can pick up and reflect on. It wasn't until so my second published book was my fourth written book. And that was the first book. My fourth written book was the first book that I actually like wrote with myself in mind. Like I wrote it like as like this love letter to my teenage self. And yeah, and it's actually a pleasure and a joy and a privilege to be able to write things for other people. Dear Justice actually came out of a pair of boys that I mentored, telling me that I was their voice. And so they wanted me to write their story.
I remember the author's note for Dear Justice, where you communicated that, and it was just beautiful to then see. If you listen to the audiobook for Dear Justice, which is how I enjoyed it, you hear the author's note first, and so that sets up a certain intimate experience with the story itself. Again, knowing your intent, and it's not easy to write yourself and write some of your quirks into your characters for folks to know, especially those who follow you on your very vibrant Instagram. For us, like we know, oh, these are Nic's quirks that she assigned to her characters, and yet that made the reading experience even richer. It did not make it feel like, oh, I'm seeing too much behind the scenes. I'm lost. I'm not in the story anymore. So again, I've just been applauding you even from our time in the
Thanks,
green room.
Sue. I appreciate it.
So welcome. As you talk about, okay, so you knew that you were driven to enter the publishing space, right? What did you do next? Like, did you have publishing folks around you? I know that you are based in Atlanta, which is a city of many opportunities. But of course, when we think about the book publishing world, we think about the silos in New York or sometimes San Francisco, some kinds of publishers as far south, I guess, as Nashville, but not Atlanta. So what did that look like for you? How did you break into the biz, so to speak?
I mean, so I went your typical route where I queried to find an agent, then that agent sent my book out to editors at the publishing houses. There was an editor who was interested. My story is a little different just because like the second book that I wrote still isn't published, but it's the one that got the attention of my editor. And she basically was like, okay, I like your style, but like, I don't like the story. What else are you working on? And I wound up with like 12 hours to come up with a proposal for a new idea. And that's where Dear Justice came from. I mean, Dear Martin came from. And then after that is when I started, like, I am hyper extroverted to the point where like this pandemic is making me feel like I am being sucked into this like social black hole. And there's like, I'm in therapy like twice a week just to have somebody to talk to almost, who doesn't live in my house. But because of that extroversion, I just started like emailing people, like reaching out to people who I admired, who were already publishing books. Becky Albertalli is an author who does live here in Atlanta. So like I went to one of her events and then I emailed her afterwards and we became friends. I emailed Jason Reynolds randomly and he and I became very good friends very quickly. Most of the friends I have in the publishing industry, and I will say, this is not a thing that I could do without community. Like people who are trying to break into the publishing industry, like you definitely need to have other people around you. And for me, it was a very organic process with like debut group, because like 2017, I think there were six or maybe six Black authors in our 2017 debut group. And so I just reached out to all of them. And it became this very easy, like you have this commonality, this thing that you can connect on, and the relationships formed from there. But I'm so thankful for them. Like there's no way I could do any of this without being able to like pick up my phone and be like, girl, did you see this thing on Twitter? I cannot believe, you just need to have this space where you can vent about things like tokenism and trauma porn, like those kinds of things, which are definitely stuff that we have to deal with in this industry, for sure.
And then some. I'm trying to be on my behavior because my company has helped us have this platform, but I feel you. And what's refreshing about hearing you talk about your community and your network, when we talk about networks in book publishing, we think a lot about the very white, very nepotistic networks that are exclusive to them and weren't necessarily as open to us. And yet you're like, no, that's not how it works. We've actually made enough strides that there are enough of us, while there certainly need to be more, and we're all working on it. And you work on that by not just setting the example and creating a pathway, but you also give us comp titles, right? If we want to acquire a book like Dear Justice, well, we know that this is a successful book and our houses will allow us to do that. So thank you again. But it's wonderful to think about the kind of community that Black folks are used to having, like it takes a village adage came from, an African proverb. So to think of that being such a fundamental part of where writing is now is beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
There's a lot of resistance involved too in forming these communities, because like, I think about American economics and capitalism and the way these corporations are set up, you know, like they are not set up with people in mind, like let's be honest. And for a while, when I think about systemic racism, when I think about the programming that we have been conditioned to absorb and walk within, it's designed really to make us compete with each other for that one spot at the table. And so like having to actively resist that and support one another, honestly, is I think the only reason we've been able to make these strides forward. So like to all my Black folks out here, like continue to support and uplift one another, because that's how we move forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm like letting that resonate. There's something else that you talked about in saying that you wrote a book. Was it your fourth book, but your second published, that you wrote as a letter to your younger self?
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So you also published a letter to your younger self as an op-ed in Teen Vogue.
Mm-hmm.
And there you talked about like the labeled boxes, like experiencing as an adolescent. Okay, there are labeled boxes that you're told you have to fit into. And you talk about the Christian box, the cool kid box, the gifted honors model student box. And then you say that what you would tell that younger self is set the boxes on fire, right?
Yeah.
Eliminate all of the shoulds and the oughts, so that the is, your essence, can just be. That's very powerful. How did you come to that understanding for yourself? And well, I'll start with that part of the question. How did you get there?
It took falling apart, you know, like coming to the place where like you try to do all of these things and fit all of these standards, and just there's just a day where you're like, I don't have any idea where I am, who I am, or what I'm doing, because I've been working so hard to be something else. And I just crumbled to pieces and decided that like I couldn't survive if I kept trying to fit into these different boxes. One of the best things to happen to me was the recognition that like the people who were around me and who knew me the best, their love was enough, you know? Like I don't need everybody in the world to love me. I think coming to understand who I am and like what I stand for, what I'm about, etc., and knowing that there is someone who does love me with full knowledge of my flaws. That was a thing that kind of turned everything on its head for me. And I think that for me as an extrovert, relationships are so powerful and so important, and I'm not a person who can thrive without them. So realizing that I was good enough as me to, you know, I am good enough as me to be loved by my father, for instance. My dad is like my biggest cheerleader on earth, and he's literally been there since I was born, right? So like there's really not a whole lot that he hasn't seen. And knowing that there really isn't much that I could do, there's probably nothing that I could do to lose my dad's love. That is part of where my confidence comes from. And I know that like not everybody has that kind of love in their lives. And that's part of the reason I wrote Dear Justice, because I think it's important to recognize the people who do, those of us who do have it. It's important for us to recognize that there are people who don't have it so that we can offer it. And in that offering, like in order for me to offer that, I have to like not worry about boxes and not worry about like other people's perception and that kind of thing. Like they weren't serving me. So I just had to like, they gotta go.
That's beautiful that not only did you celebrate the love that you have in your life with gratitude and an acknowledgement of how special it is, but then you're also so mindful to help curate that experience for other people as best you can. And that's by utilizing what that love has empowered you to do, which is write beautifully and meaningfully, and use that to channel that love into others' lives. I mean, that's the reason we do this. And it's beautiful to see. how do you keep your writing fresh? How do you keep it relatable to younger readers? Like, you're writing YA. As much as you look very young, you were not a teenager. How do you so how do you write in a way that rings true to that audience, even now?
I consult with them, you know, like I get a question. A question I get all the time is like, I am not X or XYZ demographic. Am I allowed to write about it? And I'm like, this is, first of all, this is the wrong question to ask. Like, you shouldn't ask if you're allowed to do something. You need to ask, first of all, why you want to, right? So if you're a person who wants to write a demographic that you are not living, which is true for me, I write children's books. I am, like you said, I am not a cheerleader. I am not a 17-year-old boy or an 11-year-old boy or a 12-year-old girl. Like, I am far past these ages. In order for me to write toward that audience, I have to actually interact with that audience. The same way that anybody who wants to write, if you are a person, like, say you share one characteristic with a character, but there's something else about them that's different. For instance, with me, like, Justice and I are actually quite a bit alike. A lot of the experiences that I write about Justice having in Dear Martin are experiences that I had when I was in high school. And so there are similarities there in that, like, I understand what it's like to go through certain experiences, but like, I'm not a boy, so I talked to boys, right? When I'm writing for even younger readers, I talk to even younger readers, and I want to know, like, what are they thinking about? What are they talking about? What are the words that they're using? I learned a new one the other day. Goaty apparently is a Goaty.
Okay.
Which is like amazing, I guess. Like, yo, this joy is good. So I got an email, it was like, yo, this book is goaty. And I was like, sweet. I am goaty, friends. Heck yes, I will take it. But having kids talk to me the way that they talk, man, it's like, even that is such an honor to me. Like, you're 13, 14 years old and you talking to me like you talk to your homeboy. Like, that means that you see me as a person that you can be your full self with. And I think that is a very important thing, like actually staying connected to the people that you're writing for, in some way, shape, or form. I do like a crap ton of school visits. Yesterday, I just had the best day because I did 3 different sessions at this all boys school in Charlotte, North Carolina. And like, yeah, I had on like blue lipstick. Like, I'm very like girly, right? And I'm sitting here telling these boys that it's okay to cry and it's okay to show fear. And like, I'm like, I write these books so that you can feel your full range of emotions, et cetera, et cetera. And they all had like 50,000 questions after, right? So I think that there is something about respecting the age group that you're writing for, respecting them as people who have opinions, who have thoughts, who are able to process information and think critically, and then interacting with them literally is the way that I like try to stay as relevant as I can and not like sound like an old head in these books.
Yeah, you're achieving it, and thank you for framing it that way, that you need to be meaningfully, authentically connected to the audiences that you are writing for. It is not just about patronizing them and, okay, I'm going to step into your community for this day while I'm collecting interviews and then go out and write my thing. Like, no, there's more involved. There's more connection. There's more love involved, right?
I completely agree.
Kind of along that track, I'm curious. This is something that over the years I've talked about with a number of my bosses, other coworkers, around Black writers, right? Do you consider yourself, and yes, you can laugh, it's appropriate, but hear me out, right? Do you market yourself, and do you enjoy being marketed as a Black writer, or do you, promote and expect others to promote you as a writer who just happens to be Black?
Oh, girl, this is a good question. I don't think there is such a thing as just happens to, like, that. That's not a thing that I will ever rock with. Like, whatever I am, it's a Black version of that. And I say that because the way, like the English language, right? Like when I think about English, I think about English literacy, I think about the history of the English language and how the English language has been used to oppress Black people. Like, no, I am a Black writer. I am a Black novelist. I am a Black speaker. Like, I want you to understand that this word Black, not only does it carry like weight, there's identity attached to it. And so it's wildly important for me to be like, no, I'm Black. I'm Black. I just want y'all to know. And part of that has to do with like, I think it's important for there to be expressions of pride in ethnicity and in heritage and in culture, right? Especially when you come from an oppressed people group, a systemically oppressed people group. I am here because my Black ass ancestors were resilient enough to continue surviving, right? They were brought over here, plucked from their homeland, brought over here, made to work in fields. They were made to labor without pay. After that was over, they were scared for their lives constantly. Like, there is not a point in American history where Black people in this country have been able to live without fear. We were afraid of the whip during slavery, afraid of racial terror during like Reconstruction and Jim Crow and the 60s and 70s, like afraid of being strung up. And now we are afraid of police. So like, I want it to be known that I am happy to be Black and proud to be Black, and that I appreciate the resilience involved in being Black and how much will and energy and like determination it takes just to get out of the bed every morning as a Black person here.
Here, I'm right there with you. And I add the caveat when I talk to a lot of my colleagues, like especially in this business, like if you think about, so the company that I work for founded in the early 1920s, right? There were still people alive in the early 1920s for whom it was illegal to even know how to read, let alone to be a centerpiece of an industry of selling and publishing books to other audiences. So of course we're going to celebrate Black achievement in this particular space because it is exceptional and it does signal to others who wouldn't see this industry as meant for them or see themselves have a place here, who identify like Black first. Oh, this is for me too. So thank you for validating that and helping me to carry that forward in the fight in the work from home office we have now. Also, so then thinking about, okay, you want to enter the publishing space, you know that you are writing with Black POV at the centerpiece of what you're doing, but you know that it isn't a Black centered and Afrocentric world that you're trying to enter into. So did you have to negotiate that? Did you have to think that through as you thought about who your agent was going to be, who your editor was going to be?
Yeah, I mean, so the interesting thing about that, there is more like selectivity in the agent stage. Like, I decided who I was going to send my work to for consideration, for representation consideration. And like, you look through and you figure out like, okay, what agents are there, first of all, are there any Black agents? And there are like 3, like there are like literally, I think 3 or 4 African-American book agents that I know of and that represent people that I know. So most people who are Black are probably not going to wind up with a Black agent initially, like maybe a bit, like you can try, but there are definitely, like, then you going into the acknowledgement section of books written by Black people who you admire, and you find out who they are represented by. Like, there's a whole science to figuring out what agents you want to send your work to. The editor piece, though, is interesting because generally the agent is the person who is curating the list of editors that your work will go to. What I will say to Black people trying to break into this, still do your own research, still know what your agent is doing, and be willing to be like, I would really like for my manuscript to go to this editor because they edited this book, and I think if they could edit that book, then they could definitely edit my book. Like, we have to definitely be willing, and this is tricky at first, but you have to be willing to make a little bit of a fuss if you're not happy. And that is hard for us, especially Black women, because we don't want to be the rabble rouser. We don't want to be the angry Black woman. Like, we fight so hard to avoid fulfilling stereotypes that sometimes we just kind of get the runaround. But like, it's okay to say what you want. Like, you're going to have to at some point step up and be like, this is not the move. I need y'all to do this a little bit differently. And, you know, fulfilling a stereotype isn't really your problem in a sense. Like, it's the problem of the person holding the stereotype. So if you want a thing, you got to be willing to kind of stick your neck out a little bit to go get it.
I'm taking that in because there's a lot of that I need to learn and practice for myself. So thank you. So we know that this is a music festival, right? And I definitely miss being at the festival. Last summer we had the opportunity to be there and be a part of the crowd. It was wonderful. So we got to talk about music, and I know that you're a music lover. I'm a music lover. If you were collaborating with a musician on any project, right? It's you and a musician. What's the project, and who is or who are the musician or musicians?
So there is a it is on my bucket list, and I am determined one day to work with this amazing man on something. But Donald Glover / Childish Gambino is effing brilliant, like on every possible level. And I would love to write like a Pixar style animated musical featuring Black boys with him. So somebody tap Childish Gambino so that we can like get this joint popping. Cause like I have a whole idea and I'm like, I gotta figure out how to get to Donald Glover because he's just the way his mind works. And I've like listened to interviews with him. Obviously the TV show Atlanta is, come on, you know what I mean? Like that to have a person who's able to manifest creativity in so many different ways, like that is a person who I would love to even just I just want to have a conversation. If you don't want to do anything, if you don't want to make anything with me, cool, just give me 5 minutes to pick your brain and see what we can come up with. That's a dream. Huge dream. So do I.
This can manifest. Definitely.
We're putting it out there. Putting it out there.
Do you listen to music as you write?
Yes. Yeah. It depends on what I'm writing. Like what I listen to depends on what I'm writing. And most of the time, what I'm writing does not actually fit what I'm listening to. For instance, my first middle grade novel, Clean Getaway, I listened to Future the entire time I was writing it. And, you know, you're writing a book about an 11-year-old and listening to some of the things that Future has to say. It's fascinating experience. But when it does come to music, I'm like an Atlanta girl through and through. Like I basically drive through the streets of Atlanta blasting Atlanta trap music, like Future, 2 Chainz, Migos, Lil Baby, Da Baby, like all just cranked all the way up and living my best life with them blasting in my car.
I love it. And I love the regional representation there. Obviously, I'm from New York, so I have a lot of love for hip hop. I owe hip hop kind of my life, my education, for many reasons, and also sense of identity. You know, Tribe Called Quest keeps me company back here. I think about how they provided an opportunity for us to see, Blackness can look like many different things. You can celebrate who you are. It doesn't have to necessarily be militant. It doesn't have to necessarily be completely docile, right? It can be expressive and artistic and jazzy and poetic at the same time. So celebrate you there.
This is how I feel about Outkast. The way you feel about A Tribe Called Quest is how I feel about Outkast. And like Like Outkast, you got like these two wildly different dudes. Like Andre 3000 and Big Boy are completely different people, but they were able to come together, and there's like totally different expressions of Blackness and humanity and masculinity, but they just came together and made the best stuff.
Yep. Isn't it beautiful?
It is.
Thank God for hip hop. I don't know what I would do without it. If we were allowed to be at concerts right now, who would you most want to see on the Afropunk stage? Who are you missing right now?
So you know what's interesting? The person that I would love to see, I wouldn't actually want to be in the crowd. I would just like to watch the crowd, but I would love to see Travis Scott. Like there's something about the way that Travis Scott is able to hold a stadium. Like I remember watching his documentary and just being blown away by this vibe he's able to create within the crowd at his concerts. And it's something I would love to just see with like, I'm not trying to be in the mosh pit, but like, I want to see it. I want to see it from like a little bit distance away. Cause I value my life. I'm too old. I'm too old for this. I'm far too old, but I would love to like witness it and feel. Cause like, you know, it's like when you get in spaces, and I am sad that like Afropunk's not happening live because I would have loved to have been there this year. But like when you get in spaces where music is the uniting thing, like the thing that is like bringing everybody together, there's something there that is just utterly indescribable that you can't find it anywhere else.
Sure can't. Nothing like it. I can't wait for it to be restored. Just gotta hang on until we can get there.
For dear life, Porscha.
For dear life. Question. So talking about adages and quotes that keep us going. There's one, if you want to be a good writer, you have to be a good reader, right? Mm-hmm. So what would you recommend someone read? Like they're trying to get started now. They have a couple of books. Maybe they've read Dear Martin, Dear Justyce, right? And they're like, yeah, I want to do this, but 2 books is not enough to develop your literary career. So what kinds of things would you recommend folks read right now? Especially those who are interested in developing themselves as writers?
So honestly, my answer to this question is not going to be helpful at all because it's everything. Like no matter what genre. So if a person wants to write for a living, you need to consume as much story as possible. And that is not just in books, like consuming story on TV, consuming story in film, like even watching a film and trying to figure out where the act breaks are, I think is one of the coolest things that you can do as a storyteller. Like you watch the film and you figure out the points in which the story takes a turn. And most films are written as in the 3-act structure, right? So reading books about story structure, reading like nonfiction books about how to write a book, like those are very vital things to read. There's a book called Save the Cat that's all about screenwriting, but it's a really great book on storytelling in general. A lot of authors write books on storytelling. Stephen King's On Writing is one of my favorite books.
Absolutely.
About writing. It's so good. It's so good. There's a textbook even. I'd like buy a textbook. There's one textbook called Writing Fiction, or is it called Fiction Writing? It might be called Fiction Writing, but like it was a textbook I had at Spelman that I bought when I was taking a fiction class at Spelman that I'd been dropped out of. But the textbook itself, I like dropped out of the fiction class and created an independent study so I could just write a book. So I was like learning by doing. But I did use that book. So despite not using the classroom instruction, having this book was super helpful to me. And then read comic books. Comic books are just, it's a fascinating storytelling form. Comic books, graphic novels. I recently read, I'm reading my son's Dogman books because kids are freaking obsessed with them. And I need to understand why, like, what is it about this Dogman? Like, what is going on? And then also, I think it's important to read things that you don't like, and figure out why you don't like them, right? You don't have to read the whole thing, obviously, but like there was one, I'm not going to shade the title, but there was like this book about this person who falls in love with this mystical creature. And I just remember reading, I got through the first 3 And then something weird happens at the beginning of the fourth one. And I was like, okay, I cannot finish this series. However, these are the reasons that I hated it. Like, that's actually a really good, it's educational to do that. So just read widely is my answer to this question. Read all of it, read everything.
That's a very solid answer. As someone who, I need my stories to be read, and I know that this is very, very, very narrow-minded of me, but whatever, it's how I process. I'm not smart. I say I'm not smart enough for graphic novels and comic books because I can't tell the order in which people are speaking. Like, my eyes don't know where to go. I need you to take me from left to right and top to bottom, please. But maybe you are inspiring me to try a little harder again.
Do Octavia Butler's Kindred. Like, read that graphic novel. And I think because it also takes the right book, right? So this is another thing. Like, when it comes to people who want to write, you're not really going to be able to until you find that book that makes you want to read, right? And there's something about wanting to read that stimulates my desire to write.
Yep. And actually, you know what? There are so many now, they are doing graphic novel. It's a growing trend in book publishing where we're publishing graphic novel versions of previously published books, right? So to do that for Kindred, a book that you have already experienced, right? So I know what's going to happen. I can follow it along. You're brilliant. Thank you.
Boom.
Boom. If you weren't, so to that point about reading widely, excuse me, if you weren't writing YA with children in mind, what would you be writing?
So I'm writing adult too. And then I want to write like for the screen. So like if I wasn't writing, when I stop writing YA, because I don't, at some point, I'm going to be too old for this shit, to be completely honest. Like, you're never actually too old, but like trying to keep up with the constantly changing trends in Generation Z, like what comes next? AA, like Generation AA, is that where we're at next? I have no idea. So we have Gen Z right now, and I have two mentees in Gen Z. They're 13-year-olds, and like sometimes I'll be talking to them, and I'm like, bro, I don't know how much longer I can do this because y'all are y'all on some other stuff. I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about, and if I don't know what you're talking about, I'm not going to be able to convey it in a book, right? Like, that's going to actually appeal to you. So I definitely want to write some adult stuff. I'm actually, as soon as we hang up, I have pitches due for a trio of adult projects that I should really get done because they were due like on Wednesday. Oops. So I'll definitely write some adult books. And yeah, like I said, I'd like to get into like other mediums of storytelling. Scripted podcast is something I would do. I'd like write scripted podcasts or film scripts, TV scripts, etc.
Music to our ears. For what you're working on next in the adult space, are you veering toward romance? Are you veering toward mystery? Is there a genre involved?
So these three projects are very specific. I really wish I could say more about them. But what I can say is I like it's the same thing. It'll be the same concepts, at the same kind of motivation for the stuff that I write for young people, which is like critical thought provoking entertainment, like entertainment that provokes critical thought. So it'll be the same when I kind of step into the adult space. But I also just want to have a good time and like write what I want to write and not have it be banned, because, you know, people like to do that when you're writing for children. It's like, I can write as many cuss words in this book as I want. Nobody's going to ban it because it's for grown-ups, right? Like it's actually kind of dumb. But anyway, we won't get into that. It's fine.
You can do what you want.
Yeah.
So there's something that you wrote around the time of the murder of Michael Brown. and you were encouraging folks to put their rage to good use, stand up, speak out, take to the streets. You said things can change when we get angry enough. In June of this year, folks were definitely taking to the streets. And in the book publishing world, for sure, we were trying to match that energy with our own acts of solidarity, right? Standing with our colleagues, standing with movements, standing with our authors, with the forefront of a lot of these movements. How did you experience that moment in June, and what role do you feel like writers are playing in the movement right now?
So what I will say about June is that it really highlighted to me that activism doesn't look just one way, right? So most of my June, like late May through June and even into July, was spent like hosting live conversations on Instagram with sometimes with other writers, but talking about race with other people, talking about anti-racism in education with classroom teachers, but like hosting conversations where there was like an exchange of information and an exchange of ideas. And I think that that is a very important part of activism. Is coming up with something better, right? So it's great when we take to the streets. I love that, and I support it wholeheartedly. There also have to be people who are coming up with the ideas for what we do after we defund the police. You know, like what do we do after we've abolished the prisons? Like we're working towards these things, but there has to be something better to replace what exists. You can completely tear a thing down, but something has to be built in its place, right? So like I think about activism and I think about innovation and how those are two things that have to go hand in hand in order for either of them to really be successful. So I do think that writers, like intellectual activism is a huge thing that we can all engage in just by making ourselves available and kind of putting ourselves and our opinions out there for people to grapple with and to interact with. And it's my favorite thing about being a storyteller is that I get to use all of my emotion and all of my frustration, all of the things that bother me, and I get to infuse all of that stuff into this thing that people already like. Like people love stories. We're living a story, like each and every single one of us, we're each living an individual story. We're living a family story. We're living a collective story. We're living like a global story. And so to be constantly surrounded by a thing and get to infuse what I'm thinking and feeling and the ways that I want the world to be different into that thing, honestly, is like a huge gift to me. So my encouragement to writers is to continue to use your gifting to not only reveal the world as it is, but also as it could be.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm inspired. I hope that everyone who has had the opportunity to hear us in conversation is equally inspired. Nic Stone, you are incredible, and thank you for your art and for your commitment, your love, your shine. I hope that Dear Justyce is as much of a success as it deserves to be, and that we get to hear what you're working on next and read it very soon.
It's terrifying.
It's going to be great. And think, like, not only do you have your community of writers around you, but now you also have an entire community of editors, of other lovers of the word to help uplift you and carry you where you want to go. Thank you, Afropunk, for having us here for our Rockin' Read session for the fall. We look forward to seeing you later in the weekend with some other incredible authors. But Nic Stone, you are a gem among them. And thank you again.
Thank you, gorgeous. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. All of you have a wonderful weekend.
Have a wonderful weekend, everyone.